Chapter 4 The Blythe Girls Helen, Margie, and Rose by Laura Lee Hope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 4 The First Day. The two sisters exchanged a look of helplessness. "Now what do you suppose the child means by that?" asked Margie, as Rose made a dash down the long hall toward the kitchen. The heat must have affected her brain. But there came a ring at the doorbell at that moment, and Rose pressed the buzzer in the kitchen that magically unlocked the downstairs door. That buzzer was one of the few things about the apartment that Rose liked. It was as fascinating to her as a new toy to a child, and she was delighted to be able to use it, especially for the admittance of the good-looking strainer man. The latter proved to be none other than Joe Morris, the young man who had so sheepishly presented Rose with the family strainer on the preceding afternoon. He was looking sheepish again now, as he stood twirling his cap in the doorway, and the impish Rose had a moment of wondering whether he had taken the expression off overnight or had worn it to bed with him. It was Helen who had the presence of mind enough to invite the young man in and ask him what he wanted. "I suppose you'll think I'm taking a great liberty, and I probably am," he said in a pleasant voice that exactly matched his nice face. "But I got to thinking of you three girls here alone without a man to drive a nail for you, or to help you in any way, and I reckon maybe you wouldn't think it too bold of me if I offered to set your furniture to rights for you, and maybe hang a picture or two." "I bet he swings a wicked hammer," murmured Rose in a stage whisper that carried, as it was meant to do. Joe Morris flushed and grinned good-naturedly. "I'll bet I do," he retorted. Then he turned cajolingly to Helen. "Are you going to let me prove my fitness for the job of all-around handyman?" he asked. Helen hesitated, feeling greatly embarrassed. It was hard for her to take favors from anyone, but they certainly did need a man's strength in the work of getting to rights. And Joe Morris was an extremely likable young fellow whose smile was hard to resist. "It doesn't seem right to take your time," she objected faintly, but he waved aside this objection as immaterial. "My time is my own today, to do with as I will," he proclaimed. "This is my day of rest." "And you propose to spend it in the quiet pastime of hanging pictures?" said the practical Margie. "You have a funny way of taking your rest, Mr. Morris." "For goodness sake, let him set to work, Helen. What are you waiting for?" cried Rose. "Here's a man who wants to work. Better snap him up before he changes his mind." "There speaks the modern business girl," said Joe Morris, turning his laughing gaze upon the youngest Blythe girl. "Not yet, but soon," she retorted flippantly, adding in response to the young fellow's puzzled stare, "I haven't had a chance to look for a job yet." "Well, you ought to land one in a hurry," said Joe Morris. The young moving man seemed to be everywhere at once, pulling, hauling, suggesting, and interspersing his labor with jokes that amused the girls and kept them from a full realization of the terrific heat and their own great weariness. There was satisfaction in the work, too, for, as though by magic, the apartment began to take shape and form and color, becoming neat and almost homelike as the familiar furniture found convenient resting places. At last, all was accomplished, and Joe Morris suggested refreshments. Helen, thinking he meant to invite himself to lunch, was dismayed. There was not a thing in the house to eat except the unpalatable delicatessen fare that Rose had brought home the night before, and she was hastily forming plans for slipping out to market unobserved when the young man solved her problem for her. "There's a little restaurant on the next block," he said. "Just opened about a week ago, and I hear they got pretty good eats. Let's go and prove it." Helen demurred, for she felt they were accepting too much from the agreeable young fellow, but the two other girls overbore her objections and hustled her forth into the burning street. It was terrible weather, July heat in June, and the city gleamed like a bowl of molten gold beneath the fierce rays of the sun. The cool interior of the little restaurant to which Joe Morris piloted them was very gratifying, and they sat down in the stiff and uncomfortable seats about the small white-topped table with sighs of relief. The place was half full of people seeking like relief from the heat, and as Joe Morris expertly ordered luncheon, the girls looked about them with interest. It was their first real contact with genuine New Yorkers, and they were disappointed. The clientele seemed composed mostly of middle-aged women looking discouraged and bedraggled and wilted by the terrific heat. But this was not the real New York of romantic fiction, they reminded themselves. Because they were low in funds, they had been forced to take an apartment well up toward the 200ths, and that, as Rose had discontentedly remarked, was almost as bad as not living in New York at all. They delightedly ate the tasty luncheon Joe Morris ordered for them, and were reluctant to leave the cool interior of the restaurant for the dinginess and heat of their little 5-room flat. "You girls didn't know when you were well off," Joe Morris told them as he paid the check and followed them into the sweltering street. "Anyone who had a chance to stay in Riverdale, especially in such a delightful old house as you had there, and then comes to this dirty, noisy burg." He didn't finish the sentence, but shook his head as one surprised and dismayed by the idiocy of most mortals. "As it happens," said Rose with a shake of her golden head, "we didn't have any choice." Joe Morris regarded her speculatively for a moment, while Margie flung her sister a look of reproof at having thus let a comparative stranger into their family secrets. "That's pretty tough luck," said the young moving man at last, and they finished the short walk to the apartment house in thoughtful silence. Once at the door of the apartment he had helped to put in order, Joe Morris hesitated. It was evident that he was reluctant to go, but it was equally evident that he had no further excuse for lingering. He had done all he could do, and the polite and proper thing for him to do was to say goodbye without further delay. The bashfulness that had characterized his actions the day before had returned, and he found great difficulty in making the simple request that the girls accompany him to a moving picture show that evening. Helen thanked him but refused, saying that though they were very grateful to him for his kindness, they would be too tired to go anywhere that evening. When he found that nothing could make her change her mind, Morris at last took his departure, saying that he hoped to see them soon again. End of chapter 4.